Welcome to Restoria, your cozy corner for gentle bedtime stories. My name is James and I'll be your host tonight. Every night, we bring you peaceful tales designed to calm your mind and help you drift off into a deep, restful sleep. So snuggle in, close your eyes, and let the story begin. The story tonight is called The Hearthlight Inn, Chapter 1. A Fire That Never Sleeps. The lantern above the inn door glowed gold, casting a circle of welcome light onto the mossy stones below. Outside, the wind drifted gently through the trees, carrying with it the scent of pine, old wood, and faraway places. The Hearthlight Inn stood quietly at the edge of the forest, as it always had, like a lighthouse for wanderers who had no shore to sail to, just a chair to sit in and a story to tell. Corin stood behind the counter, polishing a mug with an old cloth. He moved slowly, carefully, as if each motion helped stitch the moment together. The fire in the great hearth crackled softly behind him, never needing stoking. It had burned through storms, snow, and summers for as long as anyone could remember. The inn itself was a patchwork of old timbers and warm candlelight. The walls wore faded maps and worn quilts. The windows glowed softly behind panes of thick, bubbled glass. And the air hummed like something alive, quiet but comforting, like a room remembering lullabies. Corin turned as the door creaked open. The wind slipped in first, trailing cool fingers along the floorboards. Then came a figure-hooded, travel-worn boots, dusted with road and rain. "Evening," Corin said, setting the mug down. His voice was low and even, like a cello playing a familiar tune. The traveler nodded, dropping their hood. A young woman, maybe 20, with eyes like dusk and a silver pin in her braid. "Long trail?" Corin asked. "Long enough," she replied, her voice hoarse from disuse. He nodded toward the hearth. The chair near the fire's still warm. She sat without another word. Her shoulders softened the moment she touched the cushion. A sigh escaped her lips like steam from a kettle. Corin brought over a wooden tray with a bowl of lentil soup, a thick slice of bread, and a steaming mug of pine tea. "Thank you," she whispered. Corin simply nodded and returned to the counter. Outside, another gust of wind tapped the windows. Inside, the fire stretched upward just a little, sending soft light flickering across the wooden beams. The woman didn't speak for a while. She ate, drank, and stared into the flames. Corin watched from his corner, never staring, never pressing, just waiting. Finally, she spoke. "There was a lake," she began, "high up in the clouds. Took 3 weeks to climb. The water shimmered like glass, even in the rain." Corin said nothing. He only leaned back in his chair and listened. "I thought it was cursed," she said. "Turned out it was just lonely. Every time I sat by the water and didn't speak, it calmed, like it remembered how to be still." She paused, the mug cupped in both hands. "Some things don't need fixing," she said. "Just someone to sit quietly beside them." Corin smiled. The fire cracked softly. Another traveler entered not long after, a tall man with stars embroidered in the hem of his cloak. He carried a flute wrapped in velvet and smelled of sea wind and mountain thyme. He nodded to Corinne, who gestured toward the cushions by the hearth. The man joined the woman. They didn't speak, not at first. They just shared the quiet, the warmth, and the way the fire knew how to listen. Later, he played a soft tune on his flute. It wove gently through the room like smoke from a candle, curling around the beams and settling in the corners. Corin scribbled a note in his small leather book. Cloud Lake, lonely but kind, flute-like hush between waves. He closed the book and placed it back in the drawer. That night, as the candles burned low and the inn grew still, the two travelers dozed by the hearth. A blanket had appeared over them, somehow, and their boots sat drying beside the fire. Corin padded quietly to the door and checked the lantern. Still glowing, always. Then he returned to his own chair behind the counter, slipped on his worn slippers, and poured himself the last cup of pine tea. The fire sighed. The wind whispered through the chimney, and the Hearthlight Inn, content and quiet, held the dreams of those who had wandered far and finally stopped. At least for tonight. Chapter 2. The Mapmaker's Boots. In the morning, the forest held its breath. Dawn light slipped through the windows of the Hearthlight Inn in sleepy ribbons. A soft mist clung to the trees outside, and the dew on the grass shimmered like the footprints of something magical passing through in the night. Inside, the hearth still crackled, warm and low. The two travelers from the night before had already left boots dry, bellies full, a quiet thank you left in the shape of a folded napkin and a single polished stone on the table. Corin was wiping down the windowsills, humming to himself. He stopped briefly to stir a pot of oats on the stove, the wooden spoon clicking gently against the side of the pot. The door opened with a gust of morning air and a jingle of the brass bell above it. A short man stepped in, wrapped in layers of faded fabric, each one embroidered with compass roses and curling script. A thick leather satchel hung at his side, and his boots, though finely madderware, covered in scratches and blotches of old ink. He nodded toward Corin and set the bag gently on the floor. "Mapmaker," Corin said, as if greeting an old friend. The man grinned. "And tea, if there's any left." "There's always tea." Soon he was seated near the hearth, cupping a mug of something fragrant. A slice of warm oat bread rested beside a dish of honey. He removed his boots with a satisfied sigh and stretched his toes toward the fire. "Long trail?" Corin asked. "Long enough to lose the way," the mapmaker replied, "but short enough to find it again." He sipped his tea, eyes half-lidded. Corin waited. "Have you ever mapped a place that didn't want to be found?" the mapmaker asked at last. "I've never mapped anything," Corin replied. The man chuckled. "Well, I have. Forests that fold in on themselves. Rivers that loop through dreams. Once I followed a road that vanished behind me with every step. Had to draw the map backward as I went." He set his mug down and pulled a scroll from his satchel. He unfurled it carefully, revealing a map stitched together from dozens of smaller maps. The ink shimmered faintly, like starlight trapped on paper. "Each place remembers differently," he said. "Some paths you walk with your feet, others with your heart." He traced a line along one of the roads with a weathered fingertip. "I once found a village that only existed during twilight. If you arrived too early or too late, you'd walk right through it and never know." Corin nodded slowly. "Did you stay long?" The mapmaker smiled, bittersweet. "Just long enough to forget I was leaving." The fire popped gently. Corin brought over another pot of tea. This one smelled of wild mint and something like memory. The mapmaker didn't ask what it was. He just poured. Outside, the mist began to lift. The trees stood still, listening. And inside, the mapmaker talked not loudly, not for show, but like someone letting pieces of a story fall into place. He spoke of a canyon shaped like a sleeping lion, of the night he followed fireflies to a hidden spring, of an old woman who carried a forest's name in her hands. And when he finished, he rolled the map up and placed it back in his satchel. He stood, but not to leave. He walked to the fire, sat cross-legged, and pulled off his socks. Then he pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook and a quill. He began to draw. Not a map this time. Just the hearth, the chair, the light from the window, the way the room felt like an exhale. Corin didn't disturb him. He simply took out his own little book and wrote, "Mapmaker, worn boots, drew stillness like it was a country of its own." The man stayed until evening, and when he finally rose, he left the sketch on the table signed with a curl of compass lines and a single word, "home." Corin smiled and tucked the page into the drawer. The lantern above the door flickered once as the mapmaker stepped out into the twilight, and the Hearthlight Inn waited quietly for the next tale to arrive. Chapter 3. The Song Beneath the Floorboards. The sky outside had taken on a lavender hue, with streaks of orange and rose stretched thin above the treetops. Birds were giving their last calls of the day, and the forest beyond the Hearthlight Inn began to settle, draped in the hush that only twilight can bring. Inside, Corin lit the lanterns one by one. The gentle click of the flint and the bloom of flame were like notes in a familiar song. The fire in the hearth had been quietly blazing all day, content to keep company with silence. Tonight, the inn smelled of thyme and lemon peel roasted root stew simmering in the kitchen and fresh bread cooling near the window. As Corin placed a tray of mugs on the counter, he paused. There it was again. A sound he had heard before. Faint, deep beneath the floorboards. Not the creak of wood or the scurry of mice. Not the usual settling sounds of an old building. A hum. Low, melodic, like a voice without words. He listened for a long moment, eyes half closed. Then he nodded to himself and poured a cup of tea. Before long, the door opened. A boy stepped in Cedino more than 13, with a satchel too large for his frame and wide, watchful eyes. "Evening," Corin said. The boy hesitated, then stepped forward. "I heard the music," he said. "From the woods." Corin offered a gentle smile. "Then you're in the right place." He showed the boy to a low seat near the hearth, placed a cushion behind his back, and handed him a mug of chamomile and honey. The boy drank in silence, his fingers wrapped around the warmth. Corin sat across from him, stirring his own cup. After a long while, the boy spoke. "I don't know where I was going." "Not all journeys begin with a map," Corin replied. The fire flickered. The hum returned just a whisper, just beneath them. The boy glanced down. Corin nodded. "You hear it too." The boy nodded slowly. "It's not scary." "No," Corin said. "It's a lullaby. One the inn has been humming for years." He stood, walked to the far corner of the room, and lifted an old woven rug. Beneath it, a trapdoor. The boy's eyes widened. Corin beckoned. Together, they descended a narrow staircase into a room not meant to be found, but remembered. It was small, lined with shelves of old boots and satchels long left behind. But in the center, a wooden beam hummed with that same quiet song. Corin knelt beside it. Every traveler leaves a bit of their story here. Not on purpose, just naturally. The ones too soft to speak aloud. The boy stepped closer, placed his hand on the beam. It vibrated slightly, like a heartbeat at rest. He closed his eyes and smiled. Back upstairs, the stew was ready. Corin ladled it into 2 bowls and set them on a table beside the fire. The boy ate slowly, savoring every bite. Before bed, Corin handed him a blanket that smelled of cedar and a small hand-carved charm shaped like a curled feather. "For dreams," he said. That night, as the lanterns dimmed and the inn fell quiet, Corin returned to his book. Boy with no map followed a hum through trees, found a home in a song. He closed the book and set it beside his chair. The wind outside whispered over the roof. The beam beneath the floor gave a soft, contented hum, and the Hearthlight Inn, nestled at the edge of dreams, kept listening. Chapter 4: The Cloak with Moonlight Stitched In. It was raining the next evening softly, steadily, like the sky was exhaling. The Hearthlight Inn glowed like a lantern left on the doorstep of the world. Raindrops slipped down the windows in lazy lines, and the sound on the roof was a lullaby in its own right. Corin stood near the fire, adjusting the kettle and watching steam curl like questions into the air. The door opened with its usual creak, and in stepped a woman with a cloak that shimmered not from wetness, but from threads of silver and threads of night. The hood was deep, but when she pulled it back, her face was quiet and kind, with hair that held streaks of starlight. "Room by the hearth?" she asked. Corin gestured with his usual smile. "Always." She removed the cloak and laid it gently across a chair. Even resting, the fabric rippled like a reflection. Corin brought her a cup of tea that smelled of apple and clove. She held it close, breathing it in. This place feels older than the rain. It is, Corin replied. But it's good at remembering what to hold on to. She didn't offer her name, but Corinne didn't ask. The inn never required names, only presence. As she sipped, her eyes wandered to the portraits above the mantel faces, caught mid-laughter, mid-thought, mid-sigh. I've walked long, she said. So many paths I thought were endings. Corin poured himself a cup and waited. There was a place, she began, atop a hill where the stars touched the grass. I stayed there once, thinking I'd found where I belonged. She paused, the cup cradled in both hands. But stars don't stay. They pass through, and so did I. She unfolded a piece of cloth from her cloak, a small patch, embroidered with tiny constellations. She placed it on the table. Corin looked at it but didn't touch. Do you leave a piece of everywhere you've been? He asked. She nodded. Only the parts I want to return to. Silence, settled. The kind that fills a space without crowding it. A log shifted in the hearth, sending up a burst of golden sparks. She smiled. Once, I danced with a fox in the frost. Another time, I sang to a cave that echoed in harmony. But the quietest moments, they're the ones I carry like warmth. She traced her finger along the rim of the cup. Like now. Corin leaned back, his leather book already open. He wrote without looking. Woman in silver cloak, bringer of soft stars, carried stories in stitches. She stood to leave but didn't reach for her cloak. Leave it? Corin asked. She nodded. Just for tonight. Let it rest where it's quiet. She took the stairs to one of the rooms, her steps soundless as dusk. Corin picked up the cloak, folded it carefully, and placed it on the back of her chair. The silver threads caught the light, twinkling like the sky just before a wish. He poured a final cup for himself and watched the rain. The Hearthlight Inn was full of quiet things, unfinished songs, laughter that hadn't been laughed yet, and cloaks that shimmered with memory. Outside, the forest listened. Inside, the fire glowed. And the inn, as always, held its guests like pages in a book between dreams. Chapter 5. The Lantern That Forgot Its Light. The morning after the rain, the world outside was washed clean. Sunlight drifted in through the windows of the Hearthlight Inn like golden silk, and the air was laced with the scent of damp earth and rising bread. Corin was slicing apples for a crumble when he heard the bell above the door jingle softly. He looked up to find a young man standing in the doorway, blinking against the light. He wore a traveler's coat, but it hung on him like memory. His boots were caked in dust, and around his neck hung a small iron lantern, its glass clouded, its flame long gone. "Come in," Corin said gently. The man hesitated, then stepped forward. He removed the lantern and set it carefully on the counter. "It used to glow," he said. "It was never meant to go out." Corin nodded and guided him toward a chair near the hearth. The young man slumped into the cushion like someone finally exhaling after holding their breath for too long. Corin brought tea-spiced pear and vanilla, and a slice of oat bread warm from the oven. They sat in silence. When the man spoke again, his voice was low, uncertain. It was a gift from someone who told me to carry it always. Said it would light my way home, no matter how far I went. He looked at the cold lantern. But I must have wandered too far. One day, it just stopped. Corin watched the flames in the hearth dance slowly. Some lights aren't meant to burn forever, but that doesn't mean they're lost. The man frowned. Then what are they? Resting, Corin said simply. Like you. The fire cracked gently. The lantern, even unlit, seemed to warm in the room's glow. The man stayed all day. He read a book from the shelf by the stairs, dozed beneath a window where the sun pooled like a sleepy cat. At one point, he laughed softly at something in the book, just a breath of a laugh, but enough. That evening, Corin handed him a tiny dish of oil and a clean wick. If it ever wants to glow again, it will, he said. The man looked at him, eyes glassy, with something between gratitude and disbelief. He nodded, took the dish, and refilled the lantern slowly, like a ritual. Then he placed it by the hearth. They sat in silence again, and then just before the firewood shifted for the night, the lantern flickered. Once, then again, a soft pulse, like breath returning. The man didn't cry, but his shoulders softened, his eyes closed, and he fell asleep in the chair, the lantern glowing faintly beside him. Corin opened his book and wrote, "Lantern bearer, lost light, not purpose, slept beside the fire and remembered the way home." He looked at the man, blanket now tucked around his shoulders. The Hearthlight Inn didn't ask for reasons. It simply received. And when someone was ready, it helped them find what they hadn't known they still carried. That night, the fire burned low and sure. The lantern glowed, and somewhere in the chimney, the wind hummed a tune like hope with no words. Dreams drifted through the beams and bookshelves, and the inn, in its quiet way, kept watch over them all. Chapter 6. The Innkeeper's Book. The season had begun to shift. The trees near the Hearthlight Inn were turning their first color shints of amber and rust, glowing among the green. The wind had a new note in it, one that spoke of endings and of beginnings not yet named. Corin stood at the back of the common room, placing fresh flowers into a jar near the staircase. Dried lavender, a few sprigs of goldenrod, and one crimson leaf that had drifted through the open window. The hearth glowed softly. A single log cracked with a sleepy sigh. The chairs were empty for now, but the cushions still held the shapes of those who had leaned into them with tired bones and long stories. Corin moved to the counter and took out his little leather-bound book. He ran his fingers along the cover. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked around the room. The silver cloak still hung on the back of a chair, left by its owner who had said she'd return when the stars realigned. The iron lantern sat on the mantel, faintly glowing even in the daylight. A child's feather charm rested in a bowl of smooth stones, and tucked under the edge of a tray was a napkin, folded with care and marked only by a single pressed flower. These were not things to be kept. They were pieces of story, threads in a larger quilt. Corin finally opened his book and began to write. The inn has grown quiet again. Not empty, just resting. It knows the shape of silence, like a melody. He turned a few pages, rereading old entries. Cloud Lake. Lonely but kind. Boy with no map. Found a home in a song. Woman in silver. Bringer of soft stars. Lantern bearer. Lost light, not purpose. Corin paused, pen hovering. Then, slowly, he wrote, and me, the listener, the pourer of tea, the keeper of the fire that never sleeps. He closed the book gently. That evening, a few new travelers arrived. 2 friends who spoke with eyes more than words. A bard with a case full of silence. A woman carrying a bundle wrapped in song. Corin welcomed them each with the same quiet joy. He served stew and warm bread. He poured tea that smelled like cedar and rain. No one asked if the inn was magical. They didn't need to. They felt it in the way the cushions sighed beneath them, in the hush that settled over their shoulders like a shawl, in the warmth that seeped not just into skin but into story. Later that night, when all was still, Corin stood at the doorway. The lantern above the door burned with its steady golden glow. He didn't make a wish. He didn't need to. He simply whispered, "Thank you." To the hearth, to the walls, to the memories tucked into corners, and to the long, winding road that always seemed to bring people right where they needed to be. The Hearthlight Inn did not promise endings. It offered pause, and sometimes that was all a soul required to remember how to keep going. Inside, the fire burned, and outside, just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow, the next traveler approached, footsteps soft, heart open, ready to rest, ready to begin again.